Hello and welcome to the European Report. Here we are once again in the European Parliament to discuss three major issues. The first thing we'll be looking at is the new Parliament and assessing the European election results and what that means for this new Parliament. We'll also be discussing the rise of ISIS and the challenge that ISIS poses in terms of possibly a wider regional conflict in the Middle East. And our final story is discussing the plight of the three Israeli teenagers who were kidnapped, believed to be by Hamas. So welcome to the European Report. Thomas, it's good to have you on the programme, but I'll just introduce the rest of my guests. So it's Thomas Sandell, the founder and director of the European Coalition for Israel, Hannu Takala, leading Finnish MEP, and Claude Monaquet from the European Strategic Intelligence Centre, Security Centre based here in Brussels. So Thomas, can you give us a little bit of an update what you've been involved in, what ECI have been involved in really since the last parliamentary elections in May?
Yeah, thank you, Simon. It's good to be back in the programme. It's good to be back in a new studio.
Absolutely.
And in a new European Parliament, given that the election took place in May and the new Parliament is now here being constituted. Obviously, we were very much involved in mobilizing the electorate to vote in the elections throughout the whole month of May. We also had a luncheon at the United Nations in New York, as I may have shared earlier in the program. We were involved in a campaign to have the UN recognize Yom Kippur as a UN holiday, since all the other religious holidays are recognized by the UN except for the Jewish holidays. So that was a great success, and the Israeli ambassador Ron Prosor issued a letter from that luncheon to all the other UN missions, asking them to co-sign this request to the UN. Just 2 weeks ago, I was in Jerusalem, again meeting up with the government, at meetings in the Prime Minister's office, with the Foreign Ministry, and it's interesting to hear their thoughts. How seriously they look at the situation in Europe right now. And I think it's important for us who wants to be friends of Israel to visit Jerusalem from time to time to really hear how worried they are. And that's why organizations such as ours, European Coalition for Israel, is there to come alongside the Jewish people and the State of Israel at difficult times as we are experiencing right now.
And Claude Monaquet, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the programme. I've tried to get you on the programme a few times, so it's a pleasure that you're here now. Can you tell us something about your background? Because you've got a security and intelligence background, and something of the nature of the work that you do here in Brussels.
First of all, it's good to be here with you this morning. Yes, my background is very, very easy to understand. I spent 20 years with the French intelligence, working as a clandestine officer on the field, in Middle East, Soviet Union, behind the Iron Curtain. And then when I left the service some years ago, I decided to create a private company like a large number of my former colleagues did. So we created ESISC, European Strategic Intelligence and Security Center, and we deal basically with intelligence and security assessment for global companies, for some states. We assist some states. We make also some training for people. And we work a lot, of course, on the security situation and on terrorism and counter-terrorism.
Excellent. So you're certainly more than qualified for this programme today. And Hannu Takala, it's a great pleasure to have you back on the programme. And really, on behalf of the European Report and ECI, I want to thank you for your bold and courageous stance for Israel and the Jewish people. And sadly, you weren't re-elected to this Parliament. But can you share with us what the future holds for you? And hopefully you'll be back here sometime soon.
Thank you, Simon. So, yeah, that's right, that I had a very good campaign in Finland, and I got more votes than 5 years ago when I was elected, but now I got more votes and, everything went very well. But sadly, indeed, Mr. Olli Rehn, who is a commissioner, he was so-called top candidate or spitting candidate. So he got more votes than me, and so he is in, and I'm the substitute member. So, but I think that it's not an accident, or how to say, it's part of the guidance, I have to believe so. And I think that in some reasons now it went so, and now I'm looking for the future, and I don't know. I think that now I'm going to have some little holidays or little sabbatical, but one thing I'm sure that I will continue work for Israel. So in some field, and because that's my vocation, and I think that might be when one door is now closed, might be there's some windows is open, windows of the opportunity. So I'm open for the new initiative and new challenge, and I just think about it so that our Heavenly Father have something for me.
I'm sure he does. You're not finished yet, we know that.
Yeah.
And Thomas, we here in the first part of the programme really discussing the European Parliamentary elections which took place in May, and here we are in the new Parliament today. What's your assessment of the European Parliamentary elections, and are you concerned about the rise of far-right wing political parties that have won many seats here in the European Parliament?
Obviously, I am concerned. I'm very concerned. Of course, we are not looking at a situation where these fringe parties would have a substantial influence in the parliament. That's not the point. I think the point is that things that were unthinkable only a few years ago in Europe are now becoming not mainstream, but thinkable. That you have people who are openly neo-Nazist elected into this parliament. You have people who deny the existence of the Holocaust as new members of the European Parliament. And not one or two as in the past, but in greater and greater numbers. When we're looking at the emergence of Jobbik in Hungary, when we're looking at the election victories of Golden Dawn in Greece, when we have for the first time a neo-Nazi German in the European Parliament, I think this should be reasons for all of us to be concerned. Having said that, I think we should also differentiate a little bit and say, well, it should be okay and legitimate to criticize the European Union. UK Independence Party, per definition, should not be a problem. As we know in democracy, the electorate is always right. So if they feel that there are things that are not being done in the right way in Brussels, we should take note. And hence, perhaps my concern, as we this week are discussing who will be the next president of the European Commission, the next president of the European Parliament, and it's still the old school, so to say, federalist Europeans who are the only candidates. So I believe even though there are great concerns great reasons for us to be concerned, we should also look at the other side. I think there is a healthy uprising in part of Europe to say, listen, we want a more effective European Commission, but also not all problems are solved best in Brussels. We still need our national capitals. I think this is something that goes home very, very successfully now during the World Cup of soccer, that the nation state is still a reality that we are proud of.
Absolutely. And Claude, sadly we saw the shocking terrorist attack take place at the Jewish Museum on the eve of the European parliamentary elections here in Brussels. And we also, which is very reminiscent of the attack we saw in 2012 in Toulouse, are we seeing a rise of the far right because of Europe's failure to address this rise of Islamic extremism that we're seeing across Europe now?
I'm not so sure there is a link. I mean, clearly the failure or the so-called failure to the European nations to approach this problem is a part of the general questioning of the people. But mainly, I think that the people who voted for far right are people who are afraid by the future. They don't see any hope for them, for their children, and so on. They are crushed by the taxes. They feel that there is no place for them in Europe. First of all. Second point, when something is going well in a country, the government say, look what we did, it's wonderful. And when something is difficult, they say, oh, those bad guys in Brussels, what they did. So there is clearly a huge problem of communication for the European Union to sell the product, to see, look what we did. We have Europe without a war for 60 years. We have a good economy, even if we are into crisis and so on. We are doing better than many parts of the world, but they cannot sell this. So I think that if we take, for instance, we have some problems like in Germany, in Greece, seeing people 70 years after the war electing real Nazis, it's something unbelievable. And we cannot accept this.
Absolutely.
If we take the case of France, the 25% of people who voted for Marine Le Pen are not fascist. They're people, they didn't do the right thing. That's very clear in my view. It's a stupid choice, but the choice of people who are cornered and afraid by the situation.
Yeah. And Hannu, what does this new European Parliament and the makeup of the new Parliament mean for MEPs that are supportive of Israel? And what advice would you give to the new MEPs coming in to this new Parliament who want to stand with Israel?
So I really hope that the MEPs who are pro-Israel, they have to get organized fast, and I hope they do, because we have lost many MEPs. Sadly, like Marek Sivic, who was the chair of the European Friends of Israel, Vidal Quadras, who was the vice president of the parliament, he was also a very active member of the pro-Israel lobby organization, Sari Essayah from Finland, and myself, and many others. So I really hope that now those one who are pro-Israel, they will organize very, very, very fast. And I have to say that I'm worried that when I look the bigger picture at the moment here in the parliament, that the newcomers, that populist parties and then the far right-wing parties, they won elections, and some of them attitudes towards the Jewish people and towards the Roma people are quite hard. So I think that the new Parliament, they're going to have the real challenge, because we have to remember always that European Union is the union of the values: democracy, human rights, freedom, express, rule of law, and now there inside the Parliament are some that kind of forces which not agree those core values, and I think that it's going to be very, very challenging, and I hope that and pray that inside this Parliament they can find the proper group, pro-Israel MEPs, and they started to fight, in the right way.
Yeah. And Thomas, it would appear that this new Parliament has shifted more to the right, to the far right, and with this, what we're seeing with a huge rise of anti-Semitism across Europe, how can pro-Israel organisations such as yourself, other pro-Israel organisations, plus pro-Israel MEPs really mount the challenge that's posed by the rise of anti-Semitism?
Well, each 5 years we start afresh, and this is a peculiar situation because this is my first time back since the election. There are many new faces here. Many of our friends are not here any longer. I think it's clear that now is the time for anyone who wants to defend the values that we hold dear, including support for Israel and Jewish people, to work together. And I think this is not always the easy thing to do, and you know how the saying goes: when there are 3 Jews, there are four opinions, and I think that also relates to us as Christians often, that we are so easily divisive and want to do our own thing. I think this 5-year mandate, we really have to find a way to pool our resources together to work more intelligently than we have done in the past. One has to remember that when we founded our organization in 2003, there were not one single pro-Israel lobby group in the European Parliament. But perhaps as a result of the rise of anti-Semitism at that time, many more groups are here today. But I think, and I'm sure Hanno would agree, that the only way to move forward is really to work together in a more intelligent way than in the past, so that our voice can really be heard, and heard much louder than ever before.
Yeah. And the second issue that we're going to be discussing today is the rise of ISIS after they've moved and taken mass sway of territory in northern Iraq and threaten the unification of Iraq and possibly the wider Middle East. Claude, we've seen in recent weeks really the frightening rise of ISIS from Syria and now into their incursions into northern Iraq, even threatening Baghdad. They're known as the Islamic State of Iraq and Al-Salam. And we've seen their terrifying military incursions into Iraq. Can you tell us who ISIS are and could they ignite a Sunni-Shia conflict in the Middle East?
ISIS is quite, let's say, an old organization on the terrorist scene, as it existed under various names for more than 8 years, approximately 10 years. It's clearly, it comes from the war in Iraq in 2003, when Al-Qaeda, when the US made a terrible mistake. First, they entered Iraq, which was not maybe a very, very good idea. And secondly, they decided to disband the Iraqi army. And they put on the streets millions of people, young male people, with arms, without money, and with a huge desire for revenge. So a lot of those people joined terrorist organizations, Sunni terrorist organizations, or even jihadist organizations like Al-Qaeda, like one which became Al-Qaeda in Iraq. And ISIS is just a continuation of Al-Qaeda in Iraq. It's a very, very sectarian organization. Even the people from Al-Qaeda stricto sensu, al-Zawahiri, think that ISIS is a terrorist organization. So it tells us something. They are extremely sectarian. The specialization of al-Baghdadi, the chief of the organization, is to make the war against, making the war is killing them, Christian and Shia. And now clearly the strategic goal is to establish a caliphate, an Islamic caliphate between Syria and Iraq. And it will very likely succeed, as we saw the last days. And after we could have some problems, of course, in Lebanon. We had a bomb today, for instance, in a Shia part of, in a Shia suburb of Beirut. And we could also have some problems in Jordan. The situation created by ISIS and by the failure to the Iraqi state and the international community to address this situation will create a real urgent security problem and strategic problem in the very core of Middle East.
And Thomas, we've seen in recent days really ISIS capture the second largest city in Iraq, Mosul, with a population of 1.5 million. We've seen that the collapse of the Iraqi army, with ISIS moving on to and threatening Baghdad, and it would seem that we could start to see the fragmentation of Iraq into ethnic states. Do you believe that this is a result of American foreign policy failure for pulling out American troops too early and not having enough intelligence on the ground?
I believe one will have to go back much longer in history than to the withdrawal of the US troops. We have to remember that Iraq as a state came about around the same time as the mandate for Palestine. And what happened in 1920, of course, was just that people were sitting in Paris looking at the map and were drawing lines like this. And those lines did not in any way reflect any ethnic identity or concept of nationhood at all. Having said that, I think it's important, of course, also to understand that in this part of the region, nationhood does not have the same meaning as it has in Britain or Finland or France. But the identity is much more with the family, with the tribe, with your ethnic group, and perhaps most of all today with your religious identity. So that makes nation-state building a very complex exercise. And I think when the US went into Iraq very optimistically and thought that taking down Saddam Hussein was the answer, it only showed that they had not done their homework. So yes, I think that leaving Iraq prematurely has led to this crisis, but the crisis goes much deeper. And it's difficult for a European really to see what the solution could be, because the political culture in this part of the world is not really the most fertile ground for a democratic nation state.
And Hanu, really with the rise of ISIS, we're seeing really a humanitarian crisis, really affecting the Syrian Christians who are the indigenous people of Iraq. And to quote the leader of the ISIS, Bakr al-Baghdadi, has presented the non-Muslim population with three options: convert to Islam, pay the Islamic jizya tax, or leave the area. In your opinion, what can be done to protect these vulnerable Christian communities now caught up in Iraq and also in Syria as well?
This is challenging indeed, so because as we know that you can't negotiate with the terrorist organization, and I think the only thing what we can do, we have to call the international community and try to find a way how we can contact those people and say that if they can change their attitude and give the basic rights for those people who have been living those areas a long time. And the other thing what I think that in somehow we have to encourage the other people to encourage the so-called moderate people in Iraq to join the army and fight against the terrorism there, because I think that might be the way how we can stop that kind of movement. But be honest, there is no real answer for that, because you can't negotiate with terrorists. So I think that as a Christian we can pray and we can call to international community to do something and then encourage the, as I already said, encourage the so-called moderate to join the army.
Yeah. And Claude, in your assessment, how dangerous is ISIS? Because we've seen a reaction from the Shia population recently, with over 50,000 Shia demonstrating that they will defend Baghdad from ISIS. Also, do you think part of the problem is also caused by al-Maliki, the Prime Minister, who is Shia, and he's served in the interests of the Shia rather than actually serving Iraq as a nation of a whole and discriminating against the Sunnis? Because earlier in the program we talked about how the Americans allowed the collapse of the Iraqi army.
Yes, I have no doubt about the responsibility of Mr. al-Maliki. He was not only a pro-Shia governor of Iraq, he was a puppet of the Iranians. He was extremely corrupted, and he was absolutely unable to deliver what the people were asking for: a better life and security. And it didn't only governate direct Iraq in the interest of the Shia. He also organized, his security services organized the killing of hundreds, if not thousands, of Sunnis. So it was really, even before those last weeks, it was really a climate of civil war in Iraq for years. And we were unable to fix the problem. And as Thomas said, I don't think we can fix it. And Anu also said the same. We cannot involve ourselves in the local policy because we don't understand extremely well what is going on there. The war between Shia and Sunnis is going on for more than 1,000 years. So, and it will very likely continue for a while. The perception of nation is completely different. The culture of democracy is non-existent. So what can we do there? I'm afraid we cannot do a lot except supporting the local authorities and except trying to protect the people which are in danger, like the Christian. But it's the situation of Christian in Middle East is a real concern. I think it's very sad to say this, because the Christian in Middle East are probably the eldest Christian in the world, and they were the heritage of the testimony of the Christ and so on. But it's today it's a story. It's a part of story. I don't see any future for Christians in Middle East in the coming decades.
Which is frightening. Thomas, we've heard proposals put out by the US administration, also the British government, of wanting more Iranian involvement to confront the threat of ISIS. Do you believe that this is a good move, or do you believe this could actually hand the Iranians control of Iraq that could fulfill their vision of creating the Islamic Shia crescent across the Middle East?
I mean, there are times in history when there are no good choices. I mean, if you look back at the Second World War and you say, well, which was better, Stalin in Soviet Union or Nazi Germany, they were not a good choice between the two. And as a Finn, of course, you know, we had to be pragmatic, and for a time you can play the game, but then you know that at a certain time there will be a backlash and you have to pay the price. I think the temptation, the short-term temptation today, of course, with the Obama administration would be to engage Iran and get them involved in the crisis. Perhaps there is a role for Iran to play, but I would hate to see this being done on the altar of the negotiations about the Iranian nuclear capabilities. And sadly, the time frame is exactly the same. Now we're talking things change overnight in the region, and they have to come to a quick solution. At the same time, we only have some 3 weeks to go before the deadline, you know, when we would expect an initial agreement between the West and Iran on their nuclear capabilities. So I see this as an extremely dangerous situation where the West would be tempted to compromise just for the sake of stopping ISIS. But what happens then, you know, after we're slowed down the ISIS? Because I think there's no as we're saying on and on again in the program, there's no easy fix. So now both the European leaders and the Obama administration will really have to look at the big picture and not to give in to the demands of Rouhani.
Yeah. And Hanu, regarding the crisis of ISIS in Iraq and also Syria, it would seem that our European leaders have been very, very slow to react to what's going on. And in your opinion, what should EU leaders do and other MEPs? How do they respond to this challenge, and what do they do? Because clearly we don't want to see this conflict ignite into a war between the Sunni and the Shia right across the Middle East.
Yeah, you are right. EU leaders have been slow, but it's partly to do with the current situation. As we are effectively between the 2 parliamentary terms, so I think that might be the main reason for that. But what European Union officials or high representative or MEPs can do, when we look for past, you know, what happened in Libya, what happened in Egypt, and what happened in Syria. So I think that this record is not very, very good, because, you know, because it seems to me that in Europe we are quite naive. We don't know what is the Middle East. We think that we can go there and build the democracy, but, you know, it's not so. So I think that now we have to learn our lessons. We have to learn those mistakes what we have done during the years, and try to call all together and try to find a way how we can try to build the peace and stability for those areas, because of course it's our common will that there is not going to be a Middle East regional war. So I really hope that the External Action Service now going to take leadership and try to find a way how we can build the stability for these areas, and how we can take all the stakeholders together and try to find a solution. It's not easy task, and as I said, that we don't have a very good record when we're looking for past what has happened, but that's only then what we have to do, and try to find a way to do it.
And Claude, do you see the crisis with ISIS now as potentially leading to a wider war in the Middle East? And could we start to see the emergence of Iran intervening in a more open military way to defend the Shia population, and with the Saudis and other Sunni nations backing ISIS against the Iranians?
But actually, it's ongoing for years. We have a proxy war between Iran and between Tehran and Riyadh in the Middle East for 5 years, maybe. We had problems in Bahrain. We have the Syria crisis. We had the try of Tehran to involve itself in Egypt. And today we have Iraq, or the continuation of Iraq. So I think that it's complicated, and of course I don't have a lot of sympathy for Iran, but we must also acknowledge that a country has interests and has the right to protect its interests. And what the Iranians are saying is that, look, they are killing Shia in Syria. They are killing now, they will kill Syria and Iraq. So our natural, and tomorrow they will maybe kill Syria in Lebanon, Shia in Lebanon. So our natural right is to protect and defend our people. You have two things there playing there. You have a strategic play between Tehran, Riyadh, Washington, and not Europe, because Europe is unfortunately not a strategic player. I'm sorry to say this, but I'm afraid it's true. And you have tribal, sectarian, humanitarian problems. And the mix of everything, the mix of sectarian issue, of humanitarian issue, protecting people, the mix of strategic, make this a big problem. And I will finish with one point. We didn't protect the Christian in the Middle East. And we see what's happening now and what's happened for 20 years. So I understand that the Shia in Iran think we must protect Shia in other countries. If not, the Shia problem will be solved as the Christian problem is today.
Talking about issues close to home, how much of a threat does ISIS pose to European security? Because we're seeing many young, impressionable European Muslims going out to join ISIS and coming back with jihadist experience, particularly now that ISIS has also raided the banks in Mosul and have billions in their bank accounts now to actually fund major terrorist operations. So how big is ISIS a threat to European security?
I think that it's a very huge threat. If we take some figure and if we compare situation, 30 years ago in the first jihad in Afghanistan, we know that we had a few hundred people going from Europe to Afghanistan to fight the Soviets with the jihadists. In Iraq, we had a few, maybe 100 or 200, not a lot. Here we talk about somewhere around 2,500 people coming from Europe and the United States altogether. It could be a little less, it could be a little more. If we think that all of those people will not come back, some of them will die there. But let's say half of them will come back. 1,300 people will come back. And just 10% of those people pose a real security threat. We are speaking of 130 people. We haven't the technical means and intelligence means in Europe to survey, to control and to follow 130 people. So with the money, with the people experience in arm using, trained to make bombs and so on, and the real will of war, people who are going in Syria are not going there to make humanitarian works. They are going there to kill, to cut throats, to kill children, to kill women. Those people have no limits. They have no limits, they have the aid, they have the money, and they have the will. So we will, and they are 130. We will get a huge security problem, and I will be very surprised if in the coming 2 years we don't have 5 or 6 attacks like the one we had in Brussels a few weeks ago.
In listening to what some of the frightening things that Claude is saying, Thomas, really our European leaders need to wake up to the threat posed by ISIS to European security. Europe might want to turn its eye and ignore what's happening in the Middle East, but surely this has wide-ranging security implications for the citizens of Europe.
Yes, I was in, as I mentioned earlier, I was in New York a few weeks ago, and one of the main Jewish leaders there, he raised this as the number one concern for Europe. And I think that this was before what happened in Brussels. And for me, it was sort of on the horizon, but the level of concern that he raised surprised me. But having followed the situation since the last week of, or the last 2 weeks of May, of course I share the concern of Claude that this is a real concern. And like always, it's we are all targets if we don't subscribe to their ideology. But as we know, there are those who are more of a target than others. And sadly, like always, that's the Jewish people. So I think the good news is that the European authorities and intelligence service are very much aware of this threat. And I think that, if I'm not mistaken, they're also monitoring and know more or less who are going in and who are coming, who are going out and who are coming in again. Of course, the problem is in our societies is that you can monitor them, but you can't stop them. So once they have been involved in something, you may even find them, but you simply cannot stop them in time. And there are no resources for us, and the democracy that we are living under does not allow for this type of monitoring. Of course, if they would come back into a different society, I think they would deal with this threat in a completely different way. But for us, it's something that we'll have to live with. And this is, of course, a matter of great concern.
Yeah. And Hannu, as a leading European MEP, just have to ignore the rock concert going on in the background. This is something that MEPs need to get a grip on, isn't it? The whole security as threat to Europe posed by extreme Islamic fundamentalists who have gone out to fight in Syria or Iraq and now coming back to Europe pose a wider threat to the wider Muslim communities across Europe.
That it's very challenging issue, and I have to say that Claude is the specialist in that field, but I think that in the European level, in somehow we have to promote more the European values, the democracy, human rights, freedom, express, and I mean that it seems to me that we are not be faithful for our values, and we in somehow allow that this kind of situation it's developed what we have now, and so I think that it's very alarming when European guys goes to Middle East and they are ready for the fight for Islam, and so what to say? I just think that we have to in somehow think about the situation, what went wrong, and then I think that we have emphasized more and more our basic values, and remember that what is the European roles, what the European Union roles is to build the peace, build the democracy, and that's what I can say. As I said, I'm not a specialist. That's the thing what we can do in the political level.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the third issue and the final issue we're going to be discussing today is we'll be discussing the plight of the 3 Israeli teenagers who are believed to be kidnapped by Hamas. And Hannu, what do you make of this horrible kidnapping of 3 Israeli teenagers believed to be kidnapped by Hamas? They are Yael Yifrach, who's 19, Gilad Shair, who's 16, and Naftali Frankel, who's also 16.
First of all, it comes to my mind what happened some years ago when the 3 Israeli soldiers were kidnapped, and we worked very hard, and we met many times to Gilad Shalit's father, and also we met those other 2 soldiers, family members here in the European Parliament, and we called the international community to do something and negotiate with Hamas and so on. And what was the result? Luckily, Gilad Shalit, he saved, but the other soldiers, they were killed. And of course, it's something awful that something like that happened in the Middle East. And we don't know it's that Hamas or who is that organization or which terror organization who kidnapped those teenagers. I think that now we have to give all our support. The Europeans have to give all support to the Israel government, to Netanyahu, and try to push the Palestinian authority to do something that solve these things and cooperate. That now very important to cooperate with Palestinians and because that's the only way, because we don't know who is that terrorist organization. It might be Hamas, but can be someone else, because what comes to my mind also, when Gilad Shalit was released, and then Hamas have the big party in the Gaza, and they said that they're going to continue that kind of kidnapping. They're going to continue. And of course they have their demands. They would like to have the hundreds of the killers and the terrorists, that release in the Israeli jails and so on. But anyway, now I think we have to calm down and do what we can do in the political level, cooperate with Palestinian authority and give all the support for the Israeli government that they can sort it out this and try to find the solution to release those.
Excellent. And Claude, you're an intelligence and security expert. Can you tell us, we're not entirely sure whether Hamas was responsible for the kidnapping of these 3 Israeli teenagers, but if Hamas did carry out this kidnapping, what have they got to gain from this?
I don't think that the kidnapping was performed by Hamas as a whole. I mean, the central deciders of the organization. It could be a competition inside the organization, a competition between Lord of Wars inside Hamas. It could be a family which has a personal interest to gain the freedom of people who are under arrest in Israel. It could be also other organizations, as Hanu said. We know, for instance, that for 10 years, Al-Qaeda tried to install itself, to establish something in Lebanon and in Gaza. And it didn't succeed because Hamas saw immediately the threat for them, and they crushed the people of Al-Qaeda in Gaza, the Gaza Strip. So it's very difficult for the moment to see and to say who is behind this kidnapping. I don't think it's the central command of Hamas. And so it's much more difficult to assess the problem. I think it's something local and something, probably a competition or another organization. Because Hamas has really nothing, as an organization, for the moment, Hamas has nothing to win in a kidnapping like this.
Could I ask a question, since we have you on the program? Why would the organization who is responsible, why would they not make their claims public? Because usually you kidnap someone because you have a message you want to get through. Why is this not the case this time?
It's difficult to understand, but in some other case, like in Shalit, if I remember, we had to wait months to have a claim and to have a real contact with people and so on. So today the question is, if it is Hamas, why didn't claim it? And if it is not Hamas, why didn't claim it's not us? I think they're in very complicated. I mean, I'm not the lawyer and the advocate of Hamas, of course, but I think they're in a quite complicated situation. If it's not the organization but a part of the organization, if they take a distance, they could be seen as weak and weaker than the other. So it's a problem probably of competition between Lord of Wars and a competition between terrorists, basically.
So it's good to have a security expert, isn't it? And Thomas, Israel, sadly, this is nothing new for Israelis to deal with the whole issue of kidnapping. What makes this very sad is it's 3 Israeli teenagers who were on their way to the yeshiva, picking up height, trying to get a lift, and sadly, this is not new, because we've seen with Gilad Shalit the fact that Israel had to pay a high price to release over 1,000 Hamas prisoners who have blood on their hands for his release. What do you think the nation of Israel is going through right now? Because I think you were in Jerusalem at the time when this awful incident took place.
Well, it's true. I was in Israel when it happened, and of course people presumed that it would be over within 24 hours. You always hope that. I'm not going to try to pretend to express the feelings in Israel at the time. What I would like to say, though, is that it is very important, I believe, for the world community to not forget these three students. And I always like the fact that you mentioned them by name: Eyal, Yifram, Gilad Shar, Naftali Frenkel. I had to write up their names because they are human beings. It's not just a number. And we have to keep reminding the world community to bring the boys back through social media, through demonstrations. We are planning a demonstration here in Brussels in the next few days in connection with the top summit. So the European leaders understand this is something we feel for on a personal level, but even perhaps more importantly, that the Jewish people in Israel, worldwide, they understand that people have not forgotten their boys. They are also our boys now. And this is not a military solution in any way, but I always believe that public opinion is something which can never be neglected. And if there is strong enough articulation in global civil society, we keep reminding time and time again, this is something of our concern. And whoever have a link to those being responsible will have to be severely punished by the international community. I think this is why it's so important that we consistently now bring up their names, never one day forget the fact that they are kidnapped.
And Hannu, it's such a shame that you're not an MEP in this new parliament, but you know, what can be done in terms of MEP's response to this crisis with the kidnapping of these three Israeli teenagers?
So I think that what Thomas already said, that's very important to remember, that they are human beings. And mention them by name. Eyal, Gilad, Naftali, and try to give the clear message that every human being is very important. They are unique, and call the international community, call the European Union member states, Minister of Foreign Affairs, contact the Palestinian autonomy, and ask what they can do and how they can release those teenagers. I think it's very important now talking and try to do, and I'm sure that try to do something. I'm sure that the new MEPs who are pro-Israel and who are pro-democracy, who are pro-peace, they are ready. I hope they are ready to promote that and do their utmost that we can see the happy end of this kidnapping story.
Yeah. Can I add one thing? I think it's the Muslim community worldwide, in Europe, but also in the territories, are of crucial importance. And I think unless there is a clear condemnation by senior Muslim cleric and personalities, the message will not go through. And sadly, what we see from Fatah, we see it on social media, we see it on the public Facebook on Fatah. What this means now, it's not a victory sign, it's the sign of the three kidnapped soldiers. How can the European Union fund such an organization?
Yes.
And I think the sooner the better that we raise this issue and say something has gone completely wrong with this funding if we are funding a culture of hatred.
That's right.
And we also have to understand that this kidnapping doesn't happen in a vacuum. If this type of culture is there, sooner or later it's bound to happen. And here Europe has a responsibility, and we as citizens will have to address this responsibility.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask exactly the same question, that surely this is actually, if we want to solve this crisis, it's really quite simple. We just stop the EU funding to the Palestinian Authority until they actually release or put pressure on Hamas or the other Islamist terrorist organisations to release these three Israeli hostages, and not form a national unity government with Hamas, who's an internationally recognised terrorist organisation. The EU recognises that Hamas is a terrorist organisation. Claude, I want to bring you on in this one. Do you believe that this kidnapping could ignite a third intifada? We've seen Israeli incursions into the Palestinian territories, also into Gaza, And surely the only reason why Fatah and Hamas can come together in a unity government, and the only thing that unites them is their hatred for Israel, and surely that is a prelude to a further violence and war against Israel in the future.
Of course, it's calling it a third intifada, but I think quite any incident, and when I say incident, as our true friends, it's very sad to say that the kidnapping of 3 teenagers is an incident. So I don't try to make an understatement. Just understand me.
Absolutely.
But any incident could trigger a new intifada, because you have the tensions, you have the regional issues, and you have the fact that actually the situation is somewhat blocked between the Israeli and Palestinian. But I think that Palestinians must remember that the 2 other intifada didn't achieve nothing. I mean, it's very clear. I can understand that the Palestinians are waiting for a state and so on, and say it is not going as well as we want. But they must also understand very clearly that they will achieve nothing by violence, by terrorism, and by kidnapping people, or by making a third intifada. The only way, even if it is a very, very difficult way, the only way is negotiation, and it's a political situation, a solution in the Middle East, and not a third intifada.
Yeah. And Thomas, how much can we look at the failure of the West, the failure of the EU to actually condemn this Fatah-Hamas unity government amongst the Palestinian Authority has contributed to the kidnapping of these 3 Israeli teenagers?
Well, I don't know specifically looking at the kidnapping, but of course, as I say again, creating a culture where we look through our fingers on not only episodes, but a culture which is deep-rooted of hatred and suspicious, of demonizing what is supposed to be your peace partner. Anyone in this parliament, anyone at the European Commission have the evidence. It's there, and I think looking at the next 5 years now, this is the time to finally bring the European Commission to accountability, to say, listen, this is going on, we'll have to put an end to it. And I think there was some real improvements during the last 5 years, it should be said, and if I'm not mistaken, in the last budget for 2014, there is a clause which is some funds are going to be released only on the condition that there is a proper evaluation of how the funds have been used. So I think we are moving slowly in this direction, but it's been very, very slow, and the responsibility lays with us.
And Hannu, for our viewers who are very concerned, and we all are very concerned about the plight of these 3 Israeli teenagers, and we pray that they'll be safe and they'll return to their families quickly. But what can our viewers do in terms of writing to our own MPs in our own parliaments, but also in terms of writing to MEPs? What difference does it make? Because you were an MEP. How much, and if loads of people write letters, how much difference does that make?
Of course, it's very important to put the pressure, because it seems to me that some politicians might be thinking it's only 3 and it's the Middle East and it doesn't matter, that happened. But no, say that it's very important, because it's that kind of example that that we shows that the democratic countries like Israel and the European Union, we really care. We really look after our all citizens and all individuals, all human beings is important. And I think that that's the right signal to send the letters for the MPs in the national parliament, MEPs in the European Parliament, ask they to do something, ask they to show that they really are ready to protect the human lives, and they are really working for the human rights issues, because that's what we say. We say always that democracy is important for us, human rights are important for us. They are only words if we don't have the actions, and now it's the place to do give some actions, and of course it's very important that keep this issue on the agenda, organize the different kind of events, and put international pressure. And I think that that's what people can do. Pray and do. Ora et labora, as we say in that. work and praying, and I really think that that's the way how the Christian people all around Europe, I hope that they're going to do.
That's excellent. Gentlemen, I just want to thank you so much for joining me on today's European report in the new Parliament in a new studio. So I want to thank you to Claude Monaquet and to Hannu Takala and to Thomas Sandell.
Thanks.
Thank you. And I want to thank you for watching today's programme. We learned a lot today, particularly about the new makeup of the new European Parliament, the threat posed by ISIS to the peace and security in the Middle East, and also regarding the plight of the 3 Israeli teenagers believed to be captured by Hamas. So I want to thank you for watching today's European report here from the European Parliament in Brussels.